Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Spider-Man review series, and today we're re-looking at Spider-Man 2, the follow-up to the first movie tie-in game. Now, after the decent performance of the last game, Treyarch had a lot of options on how to craft the sequel. I mean, would they leave it the same and not drastically change anything, or would they try to take the effort and make it better? In hindsight, making the last game in the same vein as the early 3D titles was a smart move. I mean, it was a successful design that fans and critics liked, and taking that level of gameplay design and moving it into the then more powerful current-gen consoles was probably a no-brainer. Given that movie tie-ins are cheap and lazy, and more often than not rushed out to hit the film's release date and con a few die-hard fans into picking up a copy, you would think that Treyarch would probably just build off of what they'd done and change very few things to fit the narrative of the second film. But thankfully they wanted to do something completely different. Because of this effort to surpass the success of the last game, Spider-Man 2 improves upon everything the first game did, creating not just a good movie-based game, but one of the best open-world superhero games ever made. Spider-Man 2 follows the plot of the film, but like the first game, it adds a bit more to create a longer narrative. A big addition to the game's plot is the introduction of Black Cat. Apparently, the team received the film's shooting script prior to when filming started, and one of the earliest drafts of Spider-Man 2 did include Black Cat. Now, Black Cat is a great addition to the game, and she's an awesome character to pair up with Peter, especially when he's starting to think about giving up being Spider-Man. The game actually kind of skips over the whole Peter no longer wanting to be Spider-Man arc from the film. There is a small section where Peter kind of swings around and talks about the possibility of giving it up before he realizes that he can't stop being Spider-Man. Honestly, there was no easy way to adapt this plotline to the game, as we came here to play as Spider-Man, not Peter doing, daily tasks. Much like in the first game, the narrative of the film is bulked out by the appearance of other Spider-Man villains. Spidey will have to deal with Rhino this time, in addition to Mysterio and the return of Shocker, and of course the film's antagonist, Doc Ock. However, not all of the villains have equal amount of screen time, nor do they have very detailed plot lines, especially when you compare to how some of the villains were handled in the last game. Now, Vulture and Shocker were on a crime spree, and you basically chased them down across a few levels, which, kept things interesting. Kraven was hired to kill Spider-Man by Norman, so that fit nicely as well into the main narrative. However, here in Spider-Man 2, the villains just kind of pop up and then disappear. Rhino shows up on your way back from another mission, and after you beat him up, he's gone, making him feel less connected to everything else than even Scorpion was in the last game. Shocker returns, and you get to go after him with Black Cat, which is a cool team-up, but it's only 2 levels with him, and they're both boss fights with him. The only cool incorporated villain is Mysterio. You first get to deal with his alter ego, Quentin Beck, as he tries to prove that Spider-Man is a fraud by putting him through a series of obstacles at a stadium. After being humiliated, he dons the Mysterio costume and attacks a theater where you have to rescue civilians before hightailing it to the Statue of Liberty to stop Mysterio from turning the statue into, a statue of himself. After you deal with that, a few missions pass and you get to deal with Mysterio's funhouse lair and go through several mind-bending rooms with some slight puzzles and enemies. By far, this is the best villain strand of the bunch, but it kinda runs out of steam by the end since you never actually fight Mysterio himself. You see, after dealing with the whole Mysterio's funhouse thing, you'll be swinging around at random when the game will bring up a cutscene of Mysterio holding up a convenience store. And the game sets this up as a boss fight. Hell, it even shows him with 3 health bars. But it turns out that this is all a trick, as 1 punch and he's out. I still feel kinda disappointed at this ending, since Mysterio, while a fraud, even in the comics can hold his own against Spider-Man. The fact here is that he seems to have no actual abilities, but yet he has these crazy robots and is somehow able to turn his Manhattan high-rise apartment into a giant maze of funhouse rooms. Seemed a little confusing to me. There also was a cut boss in the form of Calypso, Kraven the Hunter's girlfriend. You'd actually see a picture of her in the comic book store, but alas, her plot was cut and actually repositioned into the next game. As for moments recreated from the film, there are a few, though honestly, Spider-Man 2 isn't really a film with a ton of action set pieces to replicate in a video game. Most of the major action moments are here, like Doc Ock's attack on the bank and the train sequence. Though stopping the train isn't exactly going to live up to how it played out in the film, though the technology to do that just wasn't there yet. Hell, it would take almost a decade for a Spider-Man game to actually pull off a cool train fight. Overall, I feel like the story adequately follows the major plot points in the film, and created a plot surrounding it which helps give it more action and spectacle. The biggest design change from the first game, and in fact the biggest design change from all previous Spider-Man games, is that there actually is no more restrictions on where Spider-Man can go. All of New York is yours to explore, and it's quite easy to veer away from the main campaign and go web swinging around the city. It's awesome to be able to crawl up the Empire State Building and then take a swan dive off of it. There's also plenty to do around the city aside from just swinging around. You can search for tokens scattered around the city, take part in races for the best time, deliver pizza, take photos for the Daily Bugle, and race to reach Mary Jane in time for dates. With all this added stuff to engage in, you can see why it's easy to avoid taking part in the main campaign. What makes this work out so well is that the web swinging feels so natural. After so many games with webs just magically attached to the air, this is the first Spider-Man game to actually have the webs attached to objects. and the physics that are added to this allow you to pull off some pretty sick moves, like wrapping around a strut on a bridge, or pulling 2 webs out and launching forward. Hell, you can even attach to a helicopter and let it drag you around the map. And while it might not seem like a very important aspect to the game, it's just a cool little addition that they put in. However, the one negative to this long list of side objectives that are in the game is that there really is no real reward for completing it all. You can spend hours searching for all the hidden tokens and completing every race until your fingers are freaking busted up and your controller is smashed into pieces, but you'll receive nothing for your efforts. There is a list of in-game awards and you'll obtain these after completing objectives, but they do nothing and they unlock nothing. There's not even like a little fake trophy to look at and be like, oh, look what I got. It's just a little thing that says you've unlocked this thing. I think it would have been better if the game unlocked costumes like how it did in the first game, or gave the player the ability to play as Doc Ock. Seriously, I was so disappointed that that wasn't here. Now don't get me wrong, the game is fun enough on its own, and I've replayed this game more times than I care to count, but I've never tried to 100% it, and I probably never will. Because I know, as fun as it would be to do so, there's no real reward for doing so. It's a shame that there's nothing cool to unlock, since there were so many cool little things to unlock in the last game. Now, in addition to these side objectives, you can also help the citizens of New York with various random crimes. These events include stopping carjackers, criminals stealing from armored trucks, gang fights, gang ambushes, perch snatchers, people needing to go to the hospital, construction workers hanging from ledges, rescuing people from sinking boats, and of course the most heroic act that a superhero in the Marvel Universe can do, retrieving a small child's balloon. God, I hate that kid's voice. These events are fun, though they can repeat after a while, so don't be surprised if you have to stop like 3 carjackings, and then 2 perch snatchers, and then a bunch of gang ambushes. The game tries to cycle through them as best it can, but if you do a lot of them, it does start to repeat. Combat is a bit more simplistic than in the first game, with most of Spider-Man's moves now being mapped to one button. Though thankfully you can now use Spider Sense to dodge attacks, Matrix style, and then you can follow it up with a melee hit or a web attack. Spider-Man can also sprint into enemies, launching them into the air, and it is extremely satisfying to launch an enemy into the air, then jump up after him, pummel him into the ground, and then continue smacking him around. Spider-Man's web abilities are also more enhanced this time around. In addition to webbing up the enemies, you can also launch them into the air, swing them around, web up multiple enemies at once, and even disarm them of their weapons. You can also buy new combos and acrobatic moves from the various shops scattered around the map. The game will usually mandate that you buy one move from the shop in each chapter of the game, so you're likely to browse around and pick up extra moves to try out. I like this combat system a little more than the last game, since it never feels like I'm taking hits from enemies, losing health, and then having to struggle to continue combat. Here you can use your Spider Sense to avoid incoming hits and take free shots. Also, combat doesn't feel nearly as stiff as it did in the first game. You don't rely on the same 3 combos over and over again, and it's much easier to get into combat. The ability to quickly switch between the variety of web combat and standard attacks also keeps things fresh. The game also has a different progression system from the first game. You'll have to check objectives off a to-do list before the game will allow you to move on to the next chapter. Usually the list includes objectives that you'll have to complete as part of the chapter, however you'll also have to collect a set number of hero points to fully complete it. You receive hero points from completing objectives that are either part of the chapter itself or completing any of the various side quests. While collecting hero points might seem like a cheap way of extending the game's length, it's not that bad actually. The game never asks you to obtain an impossible amount of hero points before moving on to the next chapter, so it never really becomes a problem. And also, you're free to do anything you'd like to obtain those hero points. So this never gets stale, since you might try doing all of the citizen challenges to reach the quota at one point, or maybe you'll try a race, deliver pizza, and then find some tokens. The important part of this design is that it lets you choose what you want to do, rather than funneling you down a path. Unfortunately, the next open-world Spider-Man game in Ultimate Spider-Man doesn't kind of follow this same regard. We'll check that out when we get back to that game. The presentation is different from the last game, giving it more of a comic book feel while still invoking a sense of realism. The open-world Manhattan looks good enough, even though there are some draw distance issues when you're falling from great heights and objects begin to pop in as you reach the ground, but it's never terrible or distracting. Tobey Maguire returns, and he's joined by Alfred Molina and Kirsten Dunst, along with video game voiceover legends John DiMaggio and James Arnold Taylor. Bruce Campbell also returns for the opening tutorial, and again uses his humor to great effect, although he's only in the game for a couple of minutes, which is kind of a disappointment. Character models are well detailed for the main cast, and they look like dead ringers for their film counterparts. Well, as much as they can given the hardware. The NPCs look decent enough, though the main citizens tend to repeat as you constantly talk to them and learn what their requests are. The gang members you fight are designed differently, which is a nice touch continuing from the last game. Doc Ock even gets his own henchmen as the Shocker, and Mysterio even has personalized robots. The soundtrack is awesome and memorable, much like the first game. Sometimes you'll be swinging around in the quiet, which creates a nice atmosphere of tranquility. However, when the main theme kicks in out of the blue as you swing, it's exhilarating. The main theme is triumphant, and I love humming it when it kicks in. The music for the races and some of the battles is a tad retro sounding. It's not as symphonic as the main theme, but it fits the comic book nature to the game, and I like it. Overall, Spider-Man 2 is a big improvement over the first game. The open world and all of its activities make Spider-Man 2 way more engaging. The only real negative here is that while there's plenty to do in Spider-Man 2, there's no real meaningful reward for doing any of the side quests. Still, even with that lack of reward for completing anything, Spider-Man 2 is still loads of fun and easily one of the best superhero games of all time. We're coming up on almost the 20th anniversary of Spider-Man 2, and honestly, it is still one of my top 5 favorite Spider-Man games, and that's even with the more recent ones that have come out. So that's saying a lot. So join us next time as the Spider-Man review series continues. Thanks for watching.